Ben Barak. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 22, that's 19, not 18. Yeah, actually, my dad had come out from the Ukraine. My mother used to say 1.5 stanzias from Kiev, which means 1.5 stations from Kiev. I presume it was west of Kiev rather than east of Kiev. My dad came out in January of 14. World War I interrupted him bringing his wife out. He had left her and his son and daughter over in Russia, in the Ukraine, so she couldn't come out until early 21, and I was born in March of 22. Born in Brownsville, Brooklyn. But Brownsville is the kind of a place that I understand you cannot go home to again, or you don't want to be caught in Brownsville in the evening. But then it was a nice community, Jewish community in Brooklyn. My parents owned a grocery store. Dad died on my 12th birthday in 1934 when I was 12. Still remember my older brother Irving, who was some 16 years older than me, taking me out of school to walk me home to tell me that my dad had died. However, my mother and dad had been in the group. My mother was a businesswoman, kind of, very much a businesswoman. For instance, when the grocery store she owned, in those days there weren't any adding machines. Consequently, when people bought a dozen different items, they would point out what they wanted. It would be assembled on the counter on their behalf, and then a big bag would be put on the counter and every item priced and put on the bag, and she was able to add up a dozen different items very quickly. She had a way of, and we would allow people to buy on credit, except that we didn't bother using their family names to describe interior between my mother. My mother would call each person descriptively, you know, like the feta, somebody who was fat, the mugger, somebody who was skinny, the stecken, that means the stick with a hole in it, stecken with the lachmi, describing a very thin woman. We never bothered with their family names, we used their descriptive names. And it was very interesting. And I was 12 when my dad died. Came to LA in June of 1936. Bought a grocery store, my mother bought a grocery store on Breed and Brooklyn, right across from the Breed Street Shul, which was the big shul in Boyle Heights. I still remember the amount of trust people had, because my mother saw the store and looked around and she liked the idea of being on that location. She told the woman who owned the store, who was also a widow, that fine, she'd buy the store. I think the price was $700, with the inventory that it had. So there was so much trust between people that the woman who was the owner merely opened the cash register and emptied out every compartment. You know, there was a compartment for pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters. Emptied out every compartment. Took the paper money out and handed it over and said, now it's your business. And without my mother paying anything as yet, just a promise of paying $700, we were in business, and there you are. That's the beginning of the Barak fortune, such as it is. Well, I went to Roosevelt High School, which was the high school in the area, named after not the then president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, but after Theodore Roosevelt. When I came home at 3:30, that was her opportunity to go upstairs and we had an apartment upstairs. I say an apartment, I think down the hall there was a toilet which we shared with others, and a few rooms, a bedroom or 2 bedrooms, and a kitchen. That was the apartment. She'd go up and make dinner, and then come down again in time for the dinner trade. Oh, I forgot to tell you about my early education at a yeshiva. A yeshiva is a religious Hebrew school, which school went from, I don't recall whether 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. until 6:30 p.m. The Hebrew subjects were taught until 3 o'clock, and then the secular subjects were taught by a public school teacher who was, this was his second job. He had finished his school teaching at 3 o'clock when public schools were over, and came to the yeshiva and taught from 3:30 to 6:30. So we had teachers, public school teachers, and this was their second job. So they weren't on their best behavior because it was their second job, and they were tired already after 3 o'clock to have to teach another 3 hours. But hey, we learned. And then when I graduated at the age of 13, was it? Yeah. I went to public high school in Brooklyn for a year until we came to LA. And that was the pre-LA history of the Barak family. Why did we come to LA? My younger brother, who was 2 3/4 years younger than I, Lou, the doctor was always sick in New York, and the doctor said he needed a warm temperature like Arizona or Southern California. Well, we knew nobody in Arizona but my older brother Irving, my 16-year older brother, married to Sarah. We had a younger sister who came to Southern California running after a young guy whose family sent him away from New York because he was too close to Sarah's sister, and she ran after him and came to Southern California, and they got married here. So we knew somebody in LA. So we came to LA in June of '36. And as I tell people, not 18, but 19. There wasn't, I don't know that there were any flights from New York to California that time. We took a train. And of course, we didn't sleep in the sleeper. We couldn't afford that. So we sat up 4 nights and 5 days while the train came west. And rather than eat in the dining car, my mother brought food with her. And on the windowsill of the seat she was sitting at, she had all the food arranged. And then when the train stopped at a station to take on or leave off passengers, we'd run into the station to grab some candy or such, but that was the only food we had. So we had our own dining card. We brought the dining instruments and dining food with us. Came to LA, and after 3 or 4 weeks, we bought the store that I mentioned on Breed near Brooklyn, and that's where I learned my grocery business. Okay, then, let's get to World War II. High school, finished, then I went to LA City College. And here we are in 1942, after Pearl Harbor, and I had to start thinking about the Army, and they grabbed me pretty soon. One of my friends from school said, hey, the Navy has got a program called the V-12 program, where they let you in school at first. Hey, it sounded great. I pictured being in the Navy as an officer and with my white uniform and being served with Filipino mess boys on board the battleship. So I went to the Naval Armory, which was where the Dodger Stadium is, as I recall, that area, and asked for the application for the Navy V-12 program. Well, they gave me 3 or 4 pages which were mimeographed, and when I looked at the pages, I realized this is going to be hard to get into the Navy V-12 program because it asked questions like where parents were born, the mother's maiden name. So I knew they already had too many Jews in that V-12 Navy program. And after I filled out the forms, handed them in and waited for a half an hour for them to come back and tell me. They came back and told me, sorry, the program is filled. And I walked over. I knew that the Marine Corps was part of the Navy, and I inquired if they had the same V-12 program. Well, they did, because they're part of the Navy. So they gave me a printed forms, and I filled it out. And I told my brother Lou, hey, try the Marine Corps V-12 program, because you'll like that program. They'll put you in school for a year, and who knows what will happen. But no, he didn't trust the Marine Corps. He went to the Army, and they had the equivalent program, but of course the Army took him in without any college at all. They put him in boot camp, rather the equivalent to boot camp, Army. And I was lucky enough on July 1st, 1943, to get to University of Redlands, where they had a Marine contingent, a V-12 contingent, also a Navy contingent, and also females, still neutral females, not in the armed forces. So I enjoyed a year of college, equivalent really of a year and a half of college, because there wasn't any summer vacation. We were in the Marine Corps in uniform, private first class, I believe. And every day the Navy guys would run around the track for a mile. That's 4 circulars. The track was a quarter of a mile long, 4 times around. And we, the Marine Corps contingent, had to beat the Navy and make it 5 times around, while the Navy was doing 4 times around. And then on Saturdays, after the parade at noon, I was able to, my way home to Boyle Heights, since my mother was alone, and my brother Lou was in the Army already. And then Sunday afternoon, hitchhiked my way back, to be back at 6 p.m. on Sunday. Oh yeah, and I recall the fastest ride I had from Redlands to Boyle Heights was a woman picked me up, and she was telling me her whole story. She was married and shacking up with somebody out in the desert, and her husband, who was in the Army, she learned had just come home, so she was racing home to get there before he came home, and that's why she drove so fast and got me to Boyle Heights, the quickest time I ever made anyhow in the Marine Corps. And I was able to, after a year at Redlands, the train took us, the little contingent, to boot camp in Parris Island, South Carolina. Except the train stopped at every city and picked up its own Marine Corps contingent from wherever college was in that area, so that the train was full of Marines by the time we got to boot camp in Parris Island boot camp for 8 weeks or 12 weeks, and then New River, North Carolina for 12 weeks of pre-officers candidate school, pre-OCS, and then another 12 weeks to Quantico, Virginia, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Marine Corps, where we had another 12 weeks, and then those who passed became second lieutenants, and had my first flight to LA, first flight home from Washington, D.C., free flight to LA, a month vacation, then had to be in San Diego, and a 10-day journey by ship with the whole 1,000 new second lieutenants to Hawaii, 6 days in Hawaii, and they broke us up into 3 different contingents. One contingent to remain in Hawaii and join the Corps there. Another contingent to fly to Okinawa, where the war was still on, and I was lucky enough to get the contingent to go to Saipan to join the 2nd Marine Division, where I became a platoon leader. And I still remember July of '45, we had a battalion meeting regarding the upcoming invasion of Japan, which I later learned was going to be taking place on November 1, '45. But luckily, the atom bomb in early August '45 saved my life. So that though we boarded ship in combat loaded, and I was in charge of one of the holds in the ship. By combat loading, meaning that you loaded the unimportant things on the bottom and the stuff you needed for combat on top, just in case the reception in Japan wouldn't be peaceful. However, it was peaceful. We landed in Nagasaki on September 23rd, which is only 6 weeks after the atom bomb. Maybe I owe my longevity to the fact that we had no idea of what exposure to the after atom bomb meant. So we were in Nagasaki a few months, and the division went to Sasebo, which had been the headquarters of the Japanese Navy. Sasebo in the southern island of Kyushu, because of the fact that in civilian life, living in Boyle Heights, we had after my mother sold the grocery store, she bought a 4-unit apartment house a half a block north of First Street on Chicago Street. And on the corner of First and Chicago, there was a library. The library closed at 1 p.m., but we would go to the shul, and I'd look up all the LA City and county jobs. I had worked thereafter. I passed and got my first job with LA County at $70 a month, which I thought was a good salary. And my job consists of court, recording them, and there were books for each books with pages, and each page had a different court, and I had to record from the document and to make a permanent record of the documents filed in each court case. And then the best part of the job that I enjoyed was going up to the 20th floor of the Hall of Records, which was the top floor. Each floor of the Hall of Records, from the 10th to the 20th, had 3 courtrooms. And while the court was in session, I enjoyed coming dressed up, with a suit and a tie, and walking to the court where the court clerk sat up in the courtroom on the side, and picking up all the documents that he had to have filed in the Hall of Records. That way I felt very important, being able to go in the courtroom while the court was in session. 3 courtrooms on each floor, 10 floors, so some 30 courtrooms in session during the day, and picking up the documents to take to the Hall of Records to record in the ledgers. Okay, so much for my legal training. But, then I got a job. After that, I got a job with the U.S. Corps of Engineers as a teletype operator, except this job was from midnight to morning, from 12 to 7 a.m. down at 8th and Figueroa, the hall that was the U.S. Corps of Engineers headquarters. And the only one on duty was myself, other than to watch people. The telephone operator who sat in her locked room handling the telephone messages. And after I'd come in at 12, and I had about an hour's work to do. Then I'd clear 2 desks, push them together, and lie down on top of the 2 empty desks and go to sleep until the telephone operator would wake me up at 5 a.m. so I could take care of the work that had arrived while I was asleep and take care of that, so that by 7 a.m. I separated the desks, put back all the stuff on the desk where they had been earlier, and then go downstairs. And that was my first history of eating in a restaurant. There was a restaurant across the street from 8th and Figueroa on 8th Street. I forget the name. I'd have breakfast there, and then take the bus and streetcar to LA City College, where I was attending LA City College. And that's where the guy told me, he says, hey, the V12 program. Women. No, I don't recall the women. I've forgotten until I met Roz. Okay, and here's Roz. How did I meet Roz? Okay, actually, I was out of the Marine Corps in Sasebo, and because of my teletype operator training with the U.S. Corps of Engineers at midnight. They needed the war was over in Sasebo, and evidently the guy who was the coding officer for the division went home, so needed a coding officer. And because of my experience as a teletype operator, somehow they thought I became the next coding officer for the 2nd Marine Division in Sasebo. And that was an interesting experience. And I roomed with the guy who was a division legal officer. And he was a guy from Texas who had been an attorney in civilian life. And then they needed him in Tokyo for the war crime trials, which are taking place there. We were now in the spring of '46. So he had to go to Tokyo. He said, Ben, I said, yeah, I'd had a year of business law at Redlands, University of Redlands. He said, hey, I'll recommend you for the division legal officer. So against my wishes, actually, I became the division legal officer. And I had the experience, I'd had some experience watching the general court-martials, and had one general court-martial to send some poor Marine to prison on the East Coast somewhere because of something he did. I can't recall what he did or was accused of doing in Sasebo. Oh yeah, here we are now in April of '46, and the 2nd Marine Division was going back to Hawaii, and I knew, hey, I was going to go back to school, and school wasn't going to start the next semester until September, October. I didn't want to go back to the States that soon, so I applied to remain in the Marine Corps as a regular rather than as a reserve officer. So because of that, they sent me to Tientsin in China to the 1st Marine Division. Tientsin being the port city for Beijing, the capital. It's about 30 miles east of Beijing, Tientsin. I was in Tientsin for almost a half a year, and they had a nice Russian Jewish community in Tientsin, and had a few Chinese and Russian Jewish friends. And then in September, I withdrew my application for a regular Marine because it was time to go back to school. So they shipped me back to, my first flight, first flight was from Washington, D.C. to L.A. in January, February of '45 when I was through with the Marine Corps when I became an officer. So they let me fly back to L.A. for a month vacation until I had to report to San Diego. That was my first flight. And then my slowest ship trip, other than from San Diego to Hawaii with another 1,000th second lieutenant, was from Hawaii to Saipan by a airplane, the seaplane that flew very slowly. The first night of flight after leaving Hawaii, we landed in Johnson Island, which is a tiny little island, nowhere, really out of nowhere. And then we flew again to the Mariana Islands, and then from there flew to Saipan. So that was my experience with flying in a seaplane. And so I was able to sit in the back turret, open the back turret window, and throw a newspaper page out and watch it drift in the air as it headed down to the sea. And I remember being very occupied, to keep occupied, sitting in that rear and screwing the ocean with a newspaper page each time just to see the effect of the wind. Oh yes, back in civilian life in Boyle Heights, and some of my friends said, hey, there's a meeting there in Boyle Heights. It was Young Israel, some other religious Orthodox organization, where Roz and her friend, also called Roz Folinsky, had come with two guys. Had come to Boyle Heights to the same meeting, and there was one gal who always spoke up from behind and asked questions, had something to say. So after the meeting was over, I went to see who it was, and that was Roz. And that's how we met, and speaking up so that we could meet, okay? Well, I was lucky because of the fact that all these survivors of Europe, of the World War in Europe, the ghetto survivors, were starting out in business, and so was I as a CPA. So I was able to get a lot of these people as clients. They didn't know any better, and I didn't know any better. And there wasn't anybody else as far as people being CPA, so I started in with a lot of these families who became wealthy in Southern California real estate as clients. And here I'll be 93 in less than 3 weeks. And I presume you can owe it to the fact that part of it I was busy doing things like I used to jump rope at home, which jump rope I gave to my grandson. He claimed jumps rope. And bicycle ride Sunday morning. I'd, at dawn Sunday morning, ride a bike down to the beach, and then to Point, when I got to the beach, I'd go up to Malibu or down to Point. Yeah, I used to like to bicycle ride Sunday mornings, early morning at dawn when there is very little traffic, and ride all the way out to the beach and then go north to Malibu or south. A few times I went south to the Point and then took Coinga or some other street all way back to home. And bicycle, I gave away the bicycle to Aaron, who's now living in San Francisco. I quit riding, but I did ride 2/3 across country, that is all right. I've got two Aarons. I've got Aaron Kuderkovsky and Aaron Neinstein. And thanks to Jeffrey, there'll still be Barracks. My brother had daughters, my younger brother had daughters, and I have, and my daughters, 2 daughters, and my son only has 1 son and 4 daughters, so there's only very few Barracks. So there we are as far as Barracks. But yeah, then also I cycled in France for 2 weeks. Cycled until Roz she got sick at the very end, and they were nice enough to fly her from wherever I was to the hospital in south of France. And then I also cycled down from the north to the south hopefully along the Mississippi. The most of it was interior because the roads were not along the Mississippi. So I enjoyed bicycling, and with the jump rope, I jumped rope every day. And gosh, yeah, Ellen, the oldest, is due here for a week. Next week, on March 2nd, Monday, they'll be arriving, Ellen and Stanley. And Stanley is a Deutsch, and Deutsch had been my brother-in-law. Stanford Deutsch, married to my wife's sister, and then Stanley came out to visit his uncle and aunt, and that's when I introduced Ellen to Stanley, and it was a go, and they've been married now, and Stanley is 71 years of age already.
My gosh.
Ellen is 66, and then came Debbie, who kept me from being back. Oh yeah, during the Korean War, I was called. I stayed in the Marine Corps Reserve. Why, I don't know, except I thought, hey, I'd be able to have PX privileges for the rest of my life, which turned out to be a silly reason. And I was called back during the Korean War, but Roz was pregnant, so they gave me time off until Roz gave birth in December, on December 31st at 10:30 p.m., which had necessitated a little extra something or other for my wife to take that morning so she could give birth before December 31st, so I could have a deduction, income tax deduction, and my clients wouldn't look askance at me for a CPA having a child in early January and missing a whole deduction. What kind of a CPA are you? This way I was able to prove that by 10:30 that I had taken my wife to bed 9 months earlier and that I knew enough arithmetic to figure out by December 31st I'd have another deduction for the whole 364 days. And then came Mark, the young man that I had been waiting for, and there he was. And I still remember him when we moved in here and him bicycling down the street. Now, he was 3 years old. I don't think they bicycle that young anyway, but and there we are. And thank God, I'm happy to say I've got 10 grandchildren and 8 3/4 great-grandchildren. And Roz and I are living together and sleeping together in the same bed since we get to bed early because our help comes in at, suppose, 7, well, they come about 7:15, 7:30, and they leave by 3:15, 3:30, so that she's already in bed by that time.
And what time do you go to bed every day?
So I go to bed when she goes to bed. But I'm older a bit. Oh, Roz, come on into the movies. Oh, the Yiddish sayings, all right. I told you one about the kick dice as I were stecken mit der Loch. She looks like a stick with a hole in it. That's for a very slender woman. Roz, come on. In the Shul Kamisa Kinder. We don't have any ugly children, Mother used to say. By us, we don't have any ugly children. And what other say? Oh, lots of sayings. Yes, I told you in the grocery store, while Mother was alive, yeah, we'd extend credit to people because, you know, people needed credit. And rather than bother with their family names, we'd keep track of them with, you know, the feta, the mugala, the fat one, the skinny one. As I told you, there's the verstecken, the one that looks like a stick, or andere Wörter, other words. And I learned Yiddish. I don't recall at Chaim Berlin, YRCB, it was Yeshiva Rabbi Chaim Berlin, whether we learned Hebrew with Yiddish or Hebrew with English. I still don't recall. But it's a good thing I know Yiddish because Roz comes from Yiddish where you learned Yiddish, right? They spoke when we first met because she came at the age of, what, 6.5 to America and speaks English very well. Hello. Oh, Jeffrey is here. Jeffrey and Rena and the little one is here. Come on, kids.
Hi.
You can get into the movies. Abigail. Abigail. Hi, hon.
Hi guys. Hi Bobby. Hi Zadie.
Hi, kid.
Hey Zadie.
How you doing, hon?
Hi.
Thank you, dear. Don't bend over. I don't want to.
You don't want the baby to fall out? Abby, did you say hi?
When I was 14 in Brooklyn, I had a girlfriend, Florence Fine. Then my first trip back to New York, when I was about 19, I spent 2 weeks in New York and took up with Florence at that point. And I found myself in a car, as I recall, in a car, her dad and mother sitting in front of Dad doing the driving of Dad's car, and I was sitting in the back seat with Florence. And while driving, her dad says, "Ben, how are you feeling?" He really wanted to know how I was feeling. I said, "I'm feeling fine." I was feeling, but it depends how you interpret fine. Okay? And I use that as, I hope Florence is still alive and she doesn't mind me using her having 2 daughters and wanting to ascertain that they had the right gentleman friends, and gentleman friends whose purpose in being a friend was serious enough to consider marriage. After some time that Stanley Deutsch, here from New York, taking up with Ellen and wanting to find out what he had in mind eventually, I said, Stanley, let's go for a walk. And we went for a walk around the block. And a walk around the block lasts about 15-20 minutes. And I was able to garner from him enough that his intentions were serious enough that I didn't have to worry about his relations with my daughter. And so it turned out. So that when Larry took up with my second daughter, Debbie, I had learned about what a block meant, what it meant to go around a block, and that you could accomplish quite a bit in the 15 or 20 minutes that it took to saunter around the block. Again, mission accomplished. A walk around the block. So that when Mark took up with his wife, I warned him about walking around the block. And I told him that walking around the block can lead to a life. And that's, don't know whether he went walking around the block.
Ross took me around
Their block was too big because the golf course was around the block. So he couldn't go around the block because of the golf course interfering. Well, a vacation that was, oh yeah, one that you should think about, and that was the High Sierra Loop trip, which we did 2 or 3 times. That's above the Yosemite Mountains. In the Yosemite Mountain, there are 6 different camps with food and place to sleep at night. You can walk to, and then each day walk to a different camp. So you're up in the high Sierras, away from everything and everybody, and walking from camp to camp, and then spending the night, and they give you breakfast and then a lunch to take with you along the trail, and you'd walk the 7 different trails between the 6 camps. And we did that a few times, remember? And that was nice, right? Well, my CPA, I did talk about the fact that I started in a good time when...
What's your CPA license number?
Oh, my CPA license number? Oh yeah, something like 4 digits. And I go to the office every day, and Brian is very nice. He lets me continue with my office. Though as soon as I sold out to him, I took everything off the wall and put them in boxes, and they stay in boxes right until today in my office, so that if Brian doesn't want me there, I can leave in a half an hour fully packed.
Okay. What kind of computer do you use when you're preparing tax returns?
Oh, the computer? I'm computer ill-taught.
Illiterate.
There wasn't any computer when I learned, and I still don't use a computer. Instead, when I do a tax return, I put in pencil on the previous return, and somebody copies it on the computer. So I've done it by computer, second hand.
And when there's a storm or a big earthquake and everybody loses power, you're walking around the office passing out pencils to everybody, is that right?
Right. In other words, I'm not predicated, my work isn't predicated upon electricity. which everybody is empowered with now. So nobody uses a pencil for one end, they use it for the other end for the eraser, and they never use it for the pencil itself anymore. So pretty soon there'll be pencils, there'll be historic, they'll put them in museums. This is what people used to use to write with, believe it or not. Not only that, but it could be erased. And not only that, you didn't have to look far for an eraser. It came with the lead, because in those days people made mistakes and they admitted it and were able to change what they had originally written.
So what's the best thing that ever happened to you in your life?
Best thing is meeting Roz.
Good job.
Right. Roz?
Okay, you gonna give her a kiss?
Oh, man. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Though there's a little girl here, and I don't want to be too,
Risque.
yeah, you know. Depending upon the behavior of the first child. A first child can be called birth control or unbirth control. And we're sitting in the presence of a young lady who is very unbirth control. Thank God. We were married in 48. That's 1948, right? And here we are in 2015. That's 50, 52, and 15, 67 years? 66 and a half. All right, we were married in June. And now it's February. Because of lack of initiative, lack of get up and go, lack of, kid, I've got no get up and go.
Oh, God.
And as I gate this, that's how it goes.
You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by. Moonlight and love songs never out of date. Hearts full of passion, jealousy and hate. Woman needs man, man must have his mate. That no one can deny. It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by.